So welcome everyone. My name is Jaime Smith and I'm the Director of the Schools Division here at the Anna Freud Centre. And I just want to say a really warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is the fifth in our series of 5 steps seminars where we've been looking at a whole school approach to mental health. And today our theme is working together. So this is a theme that's really close to my heart. You can see that I work here at the Anna Freud in a children's mental health charity, but really I identify as a teacher. I started my career teaching in secondary schools across London. So it's a real privilege for me now that I get to combine these two elements of my passion for education and love of teaching and mental health. And it means that I can think in my work about how education and health can work more effectively together. How can we partner more effectively to better support children and young people's mental health? I think we all know that schools want and need more support in relation to mental health, and particularly as we see mental health problems in children on the rise. So this afternoon, I want us to think together about what does that mean to work together effectively? What is effective partnership working? Who are the stakeholders that we want to be engaging with? And who are the people we want to work together collectively with to better support children and young people with their mental health? We've got a really busy agenda this afternoon. We've got about an hour and a half together and we're going to have 3 key speakers. First of all, we're going to be hearing from Hannah, who'll be talking about the role of governors in relation to mental health in schools. Then we'll hear from Andy, who'll be talking about a more strategic local authority service delivery approach to better support mental health in schools. And lastly, we'll hear from Stephen, who'll be talking about the role of parents and carers and how we can better engage and work with families to support children with their mental health. So before we get started this afternoon, I'd like to just give people a flavour of some of the work that we do here at the Anna Freud Centre. Some of you might be new to our work. It might be the first seminar that you've joined. If so, welcome. So the work of the Anna Freud Centre is wide-ranging. We support children and young people and families in a range of ways. One of the things that we do is carry out research. A good example of that is at the moment we're running one of Europe's largest randomised control trials looking at mental health interventions in schools. And we're testing and evaluating 5 different mental health interventions in primary and secondary schools so that we can really understand what works to support mental health in schools and really expand the evidence base. We also run the DFE funded LINK programme, which is a programme all about joint working. And Andy will talk about this in more detail later. We've been running this work on behalf of DFE since 2015 now, working in localities, bringing together mental health professionals and education professionals to better improve joint working and improve outcomes for children in relation to mental health. We run the Schools in My network. We have nearly 30,000 members now. If you're not a member, I really encourage you to sign up. It's a completely free network that we use to just share our learning. It's a dissemination opportunity for us to share everything that we know and share our learning about mental health and wellbeing in schools, but also to hear back from you. It's a learning network. We want to hear about the work that's happening in your school and the support that you need. We share resources, we have events like this one today, and we use it as an opportunity to translate research into practice and to produce really practical, useful resources for schools to use in the classroom. We have a range of training offers for mental health for schools and for colleges. We run the Mentally Healthy Schools website, which is a completely free site to use. It's for primary, secondary and FE colleges from across the UK. And it has over 600 quality assured resources from across the whole mental health sector that you can use in your classroom with pupils, you can use with staff, in inset days, and you can use as signposting materials for parents and carers. We run the Pairs Family School, which is for children who've been excluded or at risk of exclusion, and we'll be hearing from their founding head teacher, Stephen Taylor, a little bit later. And finally, we take a leading role in the development of policy and practice in the UK. So a really wide umbrella of work that we do with a view to supporting and bettering the outcomes for children and young people in relation to mental health. If you want to find out about any more of that work, please do take a look at our website. But to go back to the theme for today, we're going to be talking about working together. This is one of the steps from our 5 steps framework, which is a whole school approach for embedding good mental health in your setting. The framework was written by mental health experts and teachers here at the centre. It's evidence-based, it's free to use, and it's interactive. So you can access it via our website. And you're seeing on your screen there an image of it. So there's 5 different areas. And our seminars have been looking at each of these areas. Today we're looking at working together. So I would encourage you to take a look at the website. Under each of the areas, we have resources, we have guidance, we have information that will help you to think about how you might embed this in your setting. And there's also some really useful case studies from schools that have already done great work in this area. So please do check it out. So today, I just want to thank you very much for being here. We are a learning organisation. We want to learn more from others and we want to learn from you. I'm well aware of the excellent work that's taking place in schools and colleges across the country. And I'd really like to invite you to share any of that with us. Share your success stories, share your good practice and the things that you've done, because we're really looking to build a bank of best practice that we can share with schools across the country. So please do get in touch with us via the Schools in Mind email address that you see there. If you want to get in touch or to take part, if you're involved in social media, you can see our Twitter handle there. Please do use that and use the hashtag 5steps. We'll be really looking for you to ask questions. We're going to have half an hour at the end of this seminar for any questions. So please go onto the Q&A tab at the bottom, type in your questions at any point whenever they come to you. Don't wait until the end, but we'll be collating them throughout the webinar and we'll have half an hour to ask questions of our speakers. And there'll also be an evaluation at the end, and we'd really welcome you filling that in, giving us your feedback, telling us what was useful and maybe what wasn't and what you'd like to see different so that we can learn. We will be sharing the slides and a video of the webinar with everyone that's attended. It normally will take us about 10 days to get that out to you, simply because we have to subtitle it afterwards to make sure that it's accessible for everyone. So just bear with us, but we will be sharing them within about 10 days. So I think that's everything from me. I'm now ready to introduce our first speaker, and I'm really delighted to introduce Hannah Stolton. Hannah is the CEO of the national charity Governors for Schools and has been since January 2020. Governors for Schools is a national education charity that finds, places and supports skilled volunteers as governors on school and academy boards. They work with schools and volunteers across England and Wales to improve education for children and young people. They have over 20 years experience matching volunteers with schools and want to ensure that every board has diverse and effective governance. Hannah started her career as a primary school teacher and then moved into the recruitment field, managing the UK operations of an in-house agency. Hannah is currently chair of governors at a primary school in Essex. And I'm really delighted, Hannah, that you're here today. I think the role of governors in promoting mental health in schools is often overlooked, but actually governors can have such a profound influence on schools. And Hannah's role in promoting wellbeing governors has been a real inspiration to us all. So Hannah, welcome, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your talk. Over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Jamie. I will share my screen. Oh, from the wrong end, sorry about that. Okay, thanks ever so much, Jamie. Pleasure to be here today and to be talking to you all about the role of governors in mentally healthy schools. As Jamie explained, Governors for Schools, we're a national charity that recruit and place volunteers as school governors. But over the last year, the last academic year, we've been running a campaign called Wellbeing Governors. And what our aim is to have a wellbeing governor on every school board. So we've been working with Anna Freud Centre to prepare resources to help governors and volunteers to be better governors in that field. So today I wanted to talk to you about why governors should be involved, so why the governors in your schools should be involved in the conversation around mental health and wellbeing, why it should be on the agenda on full governing board meetings as well as committee meetings, talk to you a little bit about the role of the wellbeing governor and what that means, and then thinking about what your governors or you can do if you are a governor in your role to support schools. So first of all, I guess the first question is, why should you be involving your governors in these conversations around making your school mentally healthy and around whole school wellbeing? think the governor's role is a strategic one. It's not an operational one. So maybe you're thinking, well, actually, this is happening on the ground at the coalface. It's not necessarily to do with governors. But if we think about the role of governors, that threefold role of governors, you'll see that actually it is really key that they're aware of the importance of having a mentally healthy school, and that staff and pupil wellbeing is really being looked after. So first of all, the governing board is responsible for setting the strategy. And I think without putting wellbeing and mental health at the heart of the school's ethos and values when you're setting that strategy, it will make it very difficult for the senior leadership to see it through. So I really think that having buy-in from your governing board is essential. The governing board has to hold the head teacher and the leadership team to account. And I think when we're thinking about making sure that schools are the best they can be, that's through looking at evidence and actions. What we really want to see is that this is something that is embedded in school, not just sort of lip service to that tick box exercise. It's really that the school are making sure that this is all across the board, and that the governors are therefore seeing and seeing a data-led approach really about what's working, what's not working. Of course, things you'll try may not work at first time, and really supportive of the school in trying out different approaches to make sure that you get to where you want to be. And finally, governor's role is to oversee the financial management of the school. So if you're in a maintained school, obviously the governors will approve the budget, or if it's a multi-academy trust or a single academy trust, the trustee board will do that. But I think a lot of the initiatives that you may want to put in place in your schools will require budget, and really having governors on board when talking about mental health and wellbeing will make sure that that budget is allocated correctly and ring-fenced. So they absolutely need to understand the importance of wellbeing across the school to make sure that that is happening. So for us, I guess our starting point when we first started looking at the campaign back in September, well, before September when we were thinking about it, what we were noticing in the applications that we received from volunteers is that more and more were talking about mental health and wellbeing in schools, in relation to schools. Obviously, the pandemic had a massive impact on people's awareness of what was going on in schools, on what pupils were facing, on what staff were facing. It was in the media, it was everywhere we looked. But we really did notice a big uptick in the number of volunteers coming forward, just in sheer volume, but also the number that were really referencing how they wanted to support schools be better in this area, really, and really to sort of support them with their aims to improve mental health and wellbeing for the young people who are in their care. So I think that was really our starting point, and so we developed the Wellbeing Governors campaign, working in conjunction with others. On the governing board agenda, generally, if we sort of ignoring the wellbeing and the mental health side at the moment for a second, all of these things will be on your governing board agenda at any time. So obviously they will be looking at the effective leadership of the school. Obviously they'll be worried about staff retention and the impact of that on pupils, but then also on budgets as well. If we don't have staff who are happy and staying in the role, then that has a knock-on effect. They'll be looking at effective use of budget, not just in terms of staffing, but also curriculum. They'll be looking at data regarding attainment of pupils and behaviour of pupils, staff performance and attendance. I think what is really key is the fact that actually we know that a mentally healthy school will all have impact on all of these areas. So I absolutely believe that it should be at the top of the agenda, really, for school governors when thinking about what they want to do and how they can make their school a better school through working with the leadership team. So, as I explained, we decided to run a wellbeing governors campaign back in September. We run this campaign basically along the lines of the three terms. So term one was all about the mental health of children, and we looked at mental health and wellbeing of the pupils and children and young people in schools, and how governors could be involved in questioning the schools about what sort of provision they were providing. In the second term, the one just gone, we looked at staff mental health and wellbeing. So we thought about actually how are governors thinking about staff mental health and wellbeing, how are they thinking about how they can best support that group. And this term, we just launched earlier this week our third term, which will be looking about being physically active and actually how that impacts on whole wellbeing of the community in terms of mental health and wellbeing. So we've sort of divided it across the three. The way we anticipate the wellbeing, so I would say what we're proposing is that a governing board has a wellbeing governor. That may not work for every school. Different schools are set up in different ways. In my own school, I'm a chair of governors, as Jaime said. We actually have two wellbeing governors. It's on our school development plan. We felt it was a really key area. So we have one who is looking at staff mental health and wellbeing, and one person who is looking at the pupil side. So I think it's important to make it work for your school, but what we really want to do is make sure it's at the heart of the conversations that the board are having. So the role of the wellbeing governor is to really embed mental health and wellbeing in the whole school provision. And how do they do that? Well, I think the key thing is that they're asking the questions and keep on asking them. So it's not just for now, it's not just for during the pandemic. This is a long-term goal and aim for the school. I think also we need to think about the whole calendar year that staff and pupils face. So it's all very well we're thinking about it at key points in the calendar, but actually when we need to make sure that we're thinking about it always. So not just in September when we've got those transition and when they're settling into new classes, but also actually during exams, and actually when we're thinking about exams and pupil mental health and wellbeing, are we also thinking about the staff mental health in that aspect? Because obviously it's a knock-on to them. So I think it's about asking the questions and keep asking, how are things going? They need to hold the board to account. So obviously your role as a governor is to hold the senior leadership team to account, the head teacher to account, but also hold your fellow board members to account by asking them, are we making demands of school that aren't necessary? Are we always thinking about data that we're asking for? Are we asking for the right data? And actually, if we're asking for more, where are we reducing elsewhere? So thinking about that balance across across what we're asking for, so that we're not perpetually asking for more and more and more, which is obviously draining on staff time and also may affect their well-being. Role of the wellbeing governor may be to look at audits and surveys. Obviously, lots of valuable information on the Anna Freud website that's available. So really just thinking about what resources are available and implementing those surveys. I absolutely would recommend. We just did a survey in my school, one for pupils, one for staff, and one for parents. So we've done the sort of three stakeholders, and really that has informed our thinking about what works for our school going forward, because I think that is imperative. It has to be about what works for your school, not necessarily the school down the road. So really asking and finding out will help the governors to be more involved and make sure that they're being responsive to what the school needs. As I said, there's lots of information out there to guide governors, which I think head teachers have so much on their plate. If governors can help sort of point them to resources that are available, that's a great thing. They're there to challenge and they're there to champion, is what I would say. By challenge, I think we sometimes have this slight concern about that sort of juxtaposition of challenge versus support, but actually by asking the questions of the senior leadership team, surely we're giving more power to their elbow. We're sort of enabling them to go and do what they want. So I think it's really important that by having that sort of constant thread through what we're doing, and constantly asking the head teacher about what we're doing within the school at large, you're actually supporting them. Finally, I'd say that if you have a staff lead for wellbeing, whether that is for others in relation to other staff or pupils in mental health, or whether it's the SENCO, I would suggest that the wellbeing governor would meet with that staff member to be able to hear about what's going on the ground, and really bring that back to the governing board at meetings. I would say that governing boards are a collective of hopefully a diverse group of people, and that hopefully will help you as a school, you know, be able to draw on those experiences. If people sit around your board table with many different viewpoints, with that those different experiences come with different perceptions and sort of perspectives, then hopefully if you're rolling out a program across the whole school, they'll be able to support with the thinking around how best to do that and how best that will work for the whole school community. So as a governor, I would say that what you should be looking for from your governors, or indeed if you are a governor, what you could be doing, is really starting each meeting with the question about how the staff are doing. And I think actually starting with the staff will then lead to the pupils. I think quite often we talk, you know, through the governing board meeting, the thread is always about the pupils, absolutely, as it should be. But I do think that, you know, finding out, especially at the moment, how the staff are doing, how they're feeling, what challenges they're facing is really key. As I said, you're there to support and challenge the SLT, and I don't think that they are they're contradictory. I think they actually work well together. I know my head teacher actually came from a different school, and when she first joined us, she was quite surprised at how much challenge she got, but she said that actually she liked it because it showed that we cared. So I think there is an aspect of, yes, challenge, as long as it's done in the right way, shows that you're concerned and you care and you're engaged and you want to help. Governors review policies all the time. That's key part of the role. And I think when reviewing policy, it's really key to think about how that policy has the mental health thread running through it and the wellbeing thread running through it. Not just when you're looking at behaviour policies and anti-bullying policies, but actually when you're looking at the marking policy, how does this impact on staff workload? Maybe when you're looking at homeschool agreements and that sort of side of things. So I think it's really important to think how mental health and wellbeing can thread through all of your policies, not just the ones where we know it will appear. It's really important to keep it on the agenda, not just, as I said, not just for now, but for the future. Keeping staffing, surveying different stakeholders within the school community, again, not just now, but for the future, so that you've got something to benchmark yourself against moving forward, and hopefully see that progression, and you know, it gives you better, make sure that you're better prepared for the future. I'd say that over the last year, head teachers and their governing boards, hopefully, I mean, speaking from experience, it's definitely so, have developed really strong relationships. If you've got a good relationship between the chair and the head teacher in particular, then hopefully that will lend itself to being a more supportive environment for the staff, because actually they'll know that the governing board are really interested in how things are going in the school and really involved. I would say that on this front, I think it is most important that governors listen, really listen to what works for your school, not necessarily for the school down the road. It is about what works for you. And I think that we've had some conversations with governors about, well, what do you do? And there's great examples out there. You know, some people say, well, we finish at 4 o'clock on a Friday and we send everybody home. Well, that's great if it works for your school. If you are somebody who doesn't like to, wants to finish everything before you leave on a Friday, maybe it's not so good. So I think it's absolutely about listening, using those surveys. It's very difficult at the moment. We're not able to be in school as previously. It's about trying to take those opportunities where you can, setting up calls, and really engaging with the whole community and finding out what will work for them. And as I mentioned before, working with external providers, head teachers have a lot on their plate. If governors can sort of signpost additional support to staff, I think that is generally very welcome. So to sum up, I think the key things really to think about for the role of the Wellbeing Governor in your setting are whether you currently have a Wellbeing Governor, or if not a single person, then perhaps a committee. As I said, you may not feel that having one governor is the right move for you, but actually having several people so that you can discuss this and make sure it is on every meeting agenda will be a good thing. Have a think about what steps your governing board are currently taking to enable your school to be mentally healthy. Are your governing board getting involved? Are they making sure that they are asking that question? If not, why not? Are they not aware of how important this is? Is it something that you actually need to go back and educate your governing board a little bit and talk to them about why you feel it's important? Or is it that they feel that other areas are more important? If it's on your school development plan, then I would really hope that that the governing board are taking this seriously and able to take things forward. We do have a lot of resources on our own website, some in conjunction with Anaforid, but in conjunction with others as well, which are for governors rather than for staff or head teachers, really, to think about how governors can engage with the wellbeing role in a strategic way rather than becoming operational, which I think is really important, because what we don't want to be doing is adding workload to the staff and making it burdensome. So really thinking about how we can keep that role strategic, how governors can get involved, but on that level rather than trying to get involved in the day-to-day. And I think then just to think about what next steps you would like to implement. What would you like to see from your governing board? And if they're not raising it themselves, I would ask them what they think the next step should be. Have you looked at where wellbeing and mental health fits within your ethos and your mission statement? Is it really clear there? And if it isn't, then why not, is what I would ask. Thank you ever so much. There are my details. I think you're on mute, Jamie.
Oh gosh, thank you. Rookie error from me. Hannah, I was just saying how brilliant that was. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and just so important to hear the emphasis on staff wellbeing. I think really good to hear that. Hannah, as you were speaking, many questions came in. So we'll hold them and we'll save them for the end.
Lovely.
I'm going to move on now to our next speaker. So I'm excited to introduce Andy Cooke. Andy has got a fantastic range of skills and experience to share with us today. He has 15 years teaching and leadership experience in both curricular and pastoral roles, and a range of publications to his name, including a teacher's guide to special educational needs. After what started as a 2-year secondment to a local authority, he finds himself 18 years later still not having escaped. Andy is Ofsted trained and played a lead role with a secondary national strategy in 2 authorities. More recently, Andy's focus has been on behaviour and wellbeing of young people, culminating in the publication of the Belonging Strategy in 2019. This is a document that builds on the premise that every child should feel like they belong in school. One of the elements of the Belonging Strategy is the support for wellbeing and mental health for young people in schools. And Andy has been instrumental in setting up the Emotional Health and Wellbeing panel in Telford and Wrekin. Andy, really pleased to have you. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie. I hope I can live up to that introduction. So just share my screen. Okay. So yeah, from Telford and Wrekin, and I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned over the last few years in terms of our work supporting young people with mental health. Hannah, thank you as well for your presentation. And actually, I'm going to start where you finished and talk about governance and about leadership within schools. Any focus on mental health of young people will make a massive difference, but actually to make that difference sustainable, it needs to be really embedded within the school ethos and central to school policies. And let's not forget the mental health and wellbeing of staff as well. Now, that needs to be central to those policies as well. For many schools across Telford and Wrekin, our starting point was the Anna Freud Link programme. This really started to stimulate people across the schools to think about this work around mental health, and built on the publication of the 2017 Green Paper, Transforming Children and Young People's Mental Health Provision. So we've ensured that every school has a mental health lead. And actually Hannah's talking about mental health governors as well, which is a great addition to that in terms of that leadership role within the school. I want to consider behaviour for a moment, and in particular, think about behaviour policies. There's obviously a statutory requirement for a school to have a behaviour policy, but how often do students with mental health problems, including attachment difficulties that stem from trauma, how often do those young people fall foul of that behaviour policy? Have you as a school, have you analysed the outcomes of your sanctions? Have you looked at different groups, different vulnerable groups, to see if the sanctions are applied fairly across, to see if there's any inequality? So what we need to do is to think about that balance. We need to think about meeting the needs of young people, thinking about the ethos and the values of the school, and how we ensure that we don't discriminate against young people through things like, for example, the behaviour policy. We need to try and get that balance right. If the behaviour is too, if the behaviour policy is too rigid, then we've got an imbalance there, and what we can lead to is young people being disenfranchised from education. But clearly, if we have the values and the ethos, but no structure behind that, then that can lead to an anarchic approach. So that balance is crucial. In Telford and Wrekin, we published our belonging strategy, and this is based on that principle that every young person feels like they need to belong in school. This is our definition of inclusion and comes from the work of Catherine Riley. So we talk about every child having a champion in school. Does every child in your school have someone that they could turn to, someone who understands what their difficulties are, understand how it is important for those young people to have that support? The belonging strategy has 5 key priorities, and of those 5 key priorities, priority 2 is our focus on emotional health and well-being of young people. And it actually ties in very closely with priority 4 as well, which is about working with partner agencies. So just to focus on that priority 2 then, our ethos is very much that every school is different. Every school has its own approach, its own ethos, and therefore, rather than being dictatorial in terms of what schools need to do, our aim has been to provide a toolkit of approaches that schools could follow to support young people. So lots of schools have had training in the Youth Mental First Aid programme, for example, but actually some schools have started in a completely different place. And the calm brain approach has had a really big impact in a few of those schools, and actually it's more of a universal approach to support all young people. So, we're very happy as long as the school has got an approach, a focus that they can use to support those young people. We've also introduced a model of interventions, and we've treated it as a pyramid of numbers rather than a staged approach where people automatically go up through the stages. We wanted to think of it in terms of that pyramid of numbers, in terms of the universal entitlement at the bottom being for all, through to the alternative provision at the top being for a very small number of people. So interventions what should all follow the graduated response with the assess, plan, do, review cycle, and should be appropriate to the needs of each young person. So some young people may need to go in higher up the pyramid than starting at the bottom. But you can see some of those programs that we talked about on the last slide appearing in there, as well as the specialist services. We're very lucky. We had one of the earlier mental health support team pilots running through from the government. So that's one of our additional supports, for example, alongside other interventions that we've introduced locally. One that's been particularly successful has been the Emotional Literacy Support Assistance, the ELSA programme, which has been run by our educational psychology team. Another really crucial resource for us has been the mental health school nurses that is provided as part of the school nurse programme. and they're brilliant, and they can go and work in the homes and support young people who are really struggling in terms of their anxieties. So that leads us to think about who our key partners are, and this slide just shows a list of some of those key partners for us in Telford and Wrekin. But don't forget the young people themselves. They can play a really key role in this, not just in terms of that feedback, that understanding around the impact of policies and practices in schools on those young people. But actually, we've got some really great examples, such as one 11 to 18 school, where they've trained the sixth formers as youth mental health first aiders. We have other schools where they've introduced mentors from within the student population as well. And others where they've used the parent carer forum as a consultation body to help get feedback on the impact of their policies and their practice within the school. Understanding the structure and the workings of your local CAM service is also essential. I'll be honest with you, I've had to learn a complete new language in terms of working with mental health services. Our CAM service is called BU. I'm not sure who chose the name. Anyway, their interventions, their model is based on the I Thrive model, which you may well have come across. So it's understanding how your local services map into the model that they use, and you'll see there on the diagram in purple at the bottom where the BU services are mapped into that I Thrive model. So we know, for example, self-support. So at an early stage, a young person is able to go and research and find support for themselves. But we've also got services such as Beam from the Children's Society, where they have a drop-in service for those young people. Which is amazing. It's one of the most recommended services that's on offer out there to support young people. Understanding the pathways through the services is also really crucial. I must admit, it took us about 2 years and many conversations sitting down with the BU service to be able to draw up a diagram to understand how those pathways work and who can refer to which services and so on. So whilst this diagram looks fairly simple, it did actually come out of many conversations just to try to understand that better. So actually, I guess a key question for you as a school is, do you know the referral pathways for a young person who's got high levels of anxiety, for example, or neurodevelopmental needs? How do you refer on to those services? The other big initiative that we've implemented within Telford and Wrekin is we've implemented an emotional health and wellbeing panel. So this meets monthly, virtually at the moment, but we have all of the key partners around the table. You can see from the slide some of the people that are represented. It gives schools the opportunity to present cases, to present the needs of the young person, and to get recommendations from the panel, as well as signposting other services. So obviously this works well at local authority level, but actually also now we've got schools that are starting to implement a similar sort of panel at school level. So they've mapped who all of the services are that could potentially support the young people at school level. And again, they'll have that effectively a multi-agency panel where they can present some of the cases, and you get some different, some imaginative responses to help support those young people. We're also at the moment consulting over a cluster-based model. So rather than providing all of the services at local authority level, can we present at a cluster-based level instead? And actually, if you think about it, as a group of schools, if you don't have access to suitable mental health support, if your CAM service is really difficult to access, well, actually, can you provide a mental health nurse, a tier 4 worker, for example, across a group of schools? And actually, if you divide the cost between schools, it's really minimal. So in terms of identifying key resources, I think this is a challenge. The challenge isn't to find the resources, the challenge is to sift through a wide range, a plethora of really good resources out there. So if I can just plug again, the Mentally Healthy Schools website from the Anna Freud Centre is a really good starting point to look for those resources. What we've done is we've talked to partners about the services that are available and the resources that are available, and find out which ones are going to work at different levels with different approaches for different children of different ages. We also built this into our work around the interim approaches to joint working programme for the Hannah Freud Centre, which was part of our recovery curriculum for young people on returning to schools following COVID. And through that programme in particular, we focused on that assessment of needs of young people. And we've identified different resources that we can use to assess those needs across the whole cohort, but also then to dive in at a deeper level, at level 2, for those young people who've got greater needs, so that we actually know what we're talking about. We know where those needs are. Is it anxiety? Is it around separation? So that we can actually focus that support a little bit better on the needs of those young people. And actually, if we are going to assess those needs, we need to tie that back again to those services. So tie them back to our BU, our CAM service. And actually, one of our key elements of this is to actually use the same assessment grid. So the CAM service uses RCADs. We've looked at this carefully and decided that this would actually work, but for children of secondary age. So using this as a screening tool for children of secondary age means that once we do refer on to the specialist services, it's seamless. We're actually presenting them with the information in the format they're already used to using. So it actually saves time and makes those referrals far more effective. Okay, thank you for listening. I always say that if you come to a presentation, a conference like this, and you go away with one good idea, then it's been worthwhile. I hope I provided that one good idea. If not, I'm sure one of my colleagues will have done so. But look forward to answering any questions that you might have at the end of the presentations.
Thank you, Andy. I think you provided more than one idea. I think there were many ideas there, so thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to our final speaker then. So I'm really pleased to introduce my colleague, Stephen Taylor. Stephen is the founding head teacher of the Pears Family School, a school founded by the Hannah Freud Centre for children aged between 8 and 14 who've been excluded from mainstream school as a result of significant behavioural or mental health problems. The school was rated outstanding in every category at its first UK government inspection in 2017, saying the head teacher inspires and supports his staff team to do the very best that they can to improve pupils' life chances. He's loved by pupils and respected by parents and staff. A highly skilled, thoughtful and committed leadership team support the head teacher, and collectively they make the school a very special place indeed. The Pears Family School returned 60% of its children to their former school within 4 months, and 95% of those children maintained their place. The model on which the school is based has now been adopted in several countries, including Denmark and Germany. Stephen now leads on the dissemination of the family school model that aims to reduce school exclusions through keeping parents and carers at the centre of a change model by engaging systemic thinking. I'm really pleased to introduce Stephen now, who's going to talk about the role of parents and carers and how we can engage them to effectively support children and young people's mental health. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Just, I'm hoping you can all hear me. Good afternoon. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Jamie. And thank you, Hannah and Andy, for what were fantastic presentations. Thank you, Jamie, for bringing up the Ofsted, which was in 2017. As a good friend who was ahead told me once, you're only as good as your last lesson, which is not what you want to hear as a teacher. But and in line with that, I need to tell everyone who's listening that although that was a very warm welcome for me, just before we went on air, I got told not to mess up the IT, not to wave my arms about, and not to talk too fast. So if I manage 2 out of 3 of those, I'll be very, very happy. As Jamie said, I'm here really to talk about the family school approach and how that can instruct us possibly for all schools about working within that working together umbrella, what the work of the family school can teach us about parent and carer engagement. And pretty much what Andy was saying then, that if I'm trying to think what would be a reasonable takeaway from this short presentation. So if I've managed to give a little bit of an insight into the family school approach, but more than that, if we can just, by the end of this presentation, just be able to reflect on what the relevance of the family school might be for schools more widely. It was a huge ambition of the Anna Freud Centre in setting up the school to make sure that the work of the family school has wider relevance. As somebody said to me at the time from Anna Freud, look, if all we end up here is one outstanding school, then we've wasted our time. What we really need to look at is how the work of what we're doing can impact on the well-being of young people in other schools. By way of introduction, I'm going to show a short film. For somebody who comes from a school background, it's a bit cringy because it's presenting and it feels a little bit like a sales tool to me, which in a way it is, but I think it does go a long way to giving listeners a foundation in what the school's intention was and what the original vision was.
Every few months I was getting excluded.
I'll go in my room and I'll just trash it.
He brought a knife to school.
Physically hurt the baby, punched her on the side of the face 3 times. I couldn't take him anywhere at one point.
You just feel so ostracized.
Got to the stage where my daughter just wouldn't trust anybody.
Draining and frustrating because you just don't know where else to turn.
What we experience when we're very young goes a long way to defining who we become. Most adults with mental health issues will have shown symptoms before they're 18. 80% of children who need treatment don't get it. For some children, though, there is a beacon of light in the midst of the darkness.
This small, unassuming building is where some of the world's most rigorous evidence-based research on children's mental health is being put into play.
Malachi is 14. Today, he starts secondary school. He's come a long way.
When did you first go into care?
I got into care when I was 6 years old. In the middle of the night, police was at my house. They moved me into care from then. I wanted to stay with my mum and dad, so I was acting up as a child, being like 23 placements.
I was facing domestic violence. They took Malachi in care.
Did he see some of the violence?
Sometimes, yes. One time I just feel like, just give up. I fight so much, but you know what? He's alive and he's changing. And he's back with me now. So we're just taking it one step at a time.
What's different about our school is that we invite parents in, and the hypothesis is that without some significant change within the family, the change that you can get between 9 and 3 o'clock in the school day is not sustainable unless you can have an impact in their family home. By having the parents in the school, we're able to give the parents the opportunity to see their own child in the context of learning, to see the difficulties they're having.
I came in 2016. My work was very low. From 2016 to 2017, you can see the difference in my work.
And tell us what's happening today.
Today I got interviewed to my new school. I've been waiting for this for ages. It's like a little dream come true.
Before, I wasn't involved in nothing, but now I can come to the school, sit down, and they speak with me, support me, give me a little bit of courage. This place, it gives you stability and it gives you hope.
Well, the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families has even bigger ambitions. It wants to build upon this extraordinary success and replicate it. This wonderful merging of neuroscience and social science by bringing world leaders in their field to work right here in the heart of London in a £39 million landmark building.
It is going to be the first in the world that actually brings together a school, a genuine functioning school, with the research that it needs, as well as the training facilities that we can offer, that make sure that the product that we develop here is disseminated across the world. What we can do here is to make the discoveries and immediately implement them. That's what we are after.
When he was just 8 years old, Tyrell's behaviour was so disruptive, he was almost permanently excluded from mainstream school.
They used to call my mum names and stuff like that, so I used to get angry, but one day I just punched a wall. So they either gave me the opportunity to either go to the family school or get excluded. So I took go to the family school. I wasn't learning from anything. I was just kept on getting angry, just getting into fights.
How would you describe yourself today?
Better.
In what way?
I know how to control my anger now. I've come far.
Indeed he has. After his time at the family school, making new friends, Tyrell is now back with his old class, enjoying his studies, playing his beloved football, and where he wants to be. The centre's scientific approach is crucial to get the children where they need to be. It underlines and defines the Anna Freud vision. The new Anna Freud Cancer Centre will continue to build those partnerships with UCL, Yale and Harvard. There's been no one place that brings together the experiences of world-class researchers, expert practitioners, policymakers and families. No one place where we can learn from each other to tackle children's mental health. And no one organisation that can pull together the information and share it across the UK and around the world. Until now. We can build a better future for our children now and for generations to come. We would love you to join us in making this dream a reality.
Please help more children like me to follow their dreams. And Your Royal Highness, I'm still playing for Chelsea.
Thank you, and other football teams are available. Thank you for listening to that. As I say, by showing the family school, it can give an insight that I can't do within 15 minutes of what the school feels like and looks like when it's in motion, so to speak. In trying to disseminate the family school, we've come up with 7 characteristics which we think can give other schools and other school leaders an insight into the way we go about working. And the most interesting thing for me is, coming from the mainstream and coming from pupil referral units previously, is there are far more similarities than there are differences between what we're doing and what other good schools are doing. First characteristic, parent and carer engagement. I think all schools do parent and carer engagement very well. What the family school is looking at is a differentiated approach to parent and carer engagement, insofar as the most hard to reach families, the family school is dealing with exclusively what would be termed hard to reach families. In other schools, it may be you have 1, 2, 3, 4 families or more that you would consider to be hard to reach. They're the parents that don't always turn up to the excellent offer, the parent and care engagement offer that you already have. And so in our school, by getting all the parents in when a child is referred to us, we're an AP school, our aim is to put that parent back at the heart of a philosophy or a centre for change. So we are working exclusively with parents that have often been isolated. They're often hurt or angry or cynical. But we know that in order for their child to make progress and get back to a mainstream school, ideally, we know we need that parent on board and to be part of that, be a cause factor for positive change. This is the most wordy slide I've got, and I'll allow just 30 seconds for you to read it in a second. We work on the notion of creating a systemic formulation, a story around the child that helps teachers on the ground in the school understand what the function of some challenging behaviour might be, whether it be conduct disorders or oppositional defiance. We need our teachers to have an insight into what that behaviour might be about. And we think it's best if we can talk with the parents to help us construct that story. And we call that a systemic formulation. I'll just give 10 seconds just for you to read through. So going, as I said, from that notion of what do we do in the family school, what can all schools do? all schools have some sense of the causes behind the behaviours of the most challenging young people and those at risk of exclusion and those vulnerable students. Bringing the parent on board to help construct that understanding does two things. One, it just gives more information, but it also sends the message that we believe that the parent can be part of that positive change moving forward. Unsurprisingly, staff training is key, and it's been mentioned by my colleagues earlier. So increasingly, teachers are expected to take on the work of that in the past may have been only clinicians doing, but we know with the green paper that came out and embedding mental health within schools is key to improving mental well-being of young people. Well, that can't happen without training, and obviously the whole point of the 5 steps is to recognise that and to support schools to have that training. The other thing that we always say at this point is outstanding teaching and learning is a therapy in itself. And whilst our young people are trying to make their way back to mainstream, we don't take our foot off the gas in terms of insisting on core educational outcomes as well as the therapeutic outcomes. So how do we engage parents, and what does parent learning look like? We have 2 strands to that. Multifamily groups have a long history in schools with a lot of success. But in addition to that, what we've been working on is a parent and learner qualification, which we've managed to put through the Open College Network. And this is available to other schools. So it's a qualification that parents can gain whilst with us. And again, the key aspect I'd say for this slide is this, that it's not about parent learning in terms of parent classes, which typically is a model which talks about the deficiencies in parenting skills, but it's more about standing shoulder to shoulder with parents, looking at the same landscape and taking on the same learning that our teachers do and our TAs do. So Open College Network, Parent and Care and Learning, a level 2 qualification, and multifamily groups are the ways that we try and end some of the stigma, some of the isolation that parents have felt when their child is at risk of exclusion or have been excluded. We often talk about co-construction. In this slide, you can see a parent, a child, and a teacher. The parents in school to hear what progress the child's been making. The teacher's interested in what the parent thinks about the progress of the child, and what the parent, the child, and the teacher are all working on is a strategy for home. So in the small video that was shown, there was this notion of progress is limited if it's only between 9 and 3. In this photograph, you're watching a strategy being put together that can support the child at home. And from years in mainstream, I know that goes on regularly with schools. By having the parents in more regularly, we're able to just do that more often. Again, the evidence-based interventions is important. We know there's a lot of work going on now with the Green Paper to get EMHPs, education mental health practitioners, into schools and to increase the amount of mental health intervention within schools. We also know, if you look at NICE guidelines, the efficacy of those interventions is higher when we've engaged parents in the first instance. I know a lot of the manuals that are going into schools rely on parent engagement for the mental health intervention within the school. And finally, the dissemination. We are a standard school. We're Ofsteded in the same way. We're funded in the same way of other AP schools. And we have to show that our students are making progress. Historically, AP schools and PRUs, that the rigour behind how they show progress hasn't always been there. And we are working with a number of agencies at the moment, other charities, to try and standardise the expectations of outcomes that come from AP. And obviously with dissemination, you would expect, and being linked with Hannah Freud, there's a huge amount of training that goes from the school out to mainstream schools and embeds the change within other mainstream schools. And so this is just a snapshot from our website, but multifamily groups, parent coaching, how to take an audit of parent engagement, and how to develop systemic understanding. We're just working at the moment on a master's course for teachers to help teachers develop systemic thinking, so that in those crucial moments working with challenging and difficult behaviour, that increasingly teachers are able to take a step back and reflect on what the meaning or the function of behaviour is, in order to build resilience for teachers. There's a lot being said about staff well-being. One of the most challenging things I found as a teacher was that sense of, is there something I can do differently? Ought I be doing something differently? Is the behaviour that I'm not managing, or the progress I'm not seeing, is this because I don't know something? And having worked in AP and worked in PRUs, the answer to that is often no, that often as teachers, we're just stuck in the moment, and that the progress we're going to make is because we stay there and we stay shoulder to shoulder with the young person. And there's not necessarily any angel dust, but the school has to know that, so that the teaching staff remain resilient, knowing that they're doing the very best they can possibly do in that moment. And so those are some of the training products, if you like, that have come from the Anna Freud stable related to the family school. I'm going to ignore for now the diagram on the left. The one on the right it's a parent and carer engagement scale that we've tried to develop, and it's being trialled at the moment in many mainstream schools as well as AP schools. And the idea behind it is this: Ofsted became very good at recognising that in inspecting teaching, you need to look at the students to see what progress is being made. So the idea of a teacher, a charismatic teacher that performs very well, but actually what's happening, what are the teachers picking up? What are the students picking up? In the same way, we think we can be quite good at parent engagement, but what is it like to be a parent, and how do we really find that out? We know sometimes we will do a 10-point questionnaire. And do you know your child's making progress? Do you know if your child's being bullied? But getting behind that, and again, as I say, especially for those children that we may consider that we may not make the progress with, so to some of those families, what does it feel like to be a parent? And are we working together with all our community? And is there something more we can do to be truly inclusive in that area? So the parent engagement scale is available for schools, and we're using it as a tool to help schools to judge how well they are engaging their parents. And so finally, what I'd say is that there was a booklet produced a number of years ago by Jamie's team and Natalie about learning to see parent engagement as maybe something that needs to be differentiated. That for the majority of our young people, school is that place they go to be independent. They're learning to be independent, and that's quite right and proper. And parents, in some cases, are not needed in the school on a regular basis, and the communication can be something that is now and again, but it's sufficient. But for children that are vulnerable and not making progress, at risk of exclusion, it may be that we need to go back round and ask ourselves the question, okay, what more can we do now? The relationship, we need to get this relationship right with the parent in order for the young person to make progress. And it's incredibly challenging, and it needs new skills, and it needs leadership to recognise that and to make the time for us to do it. But our conviction would be that it is required and it is necessary, and that teachers have those skills in spade loads to be able to do it. I think that's where I want to leave it for now. But again, as my colleagues have said, if there are any other questions, then please look forward to answering those.
Thank you, Stephen. So I think I'm just going to welcome everyone back. So Hannah and Andy, I wonder if you can turn your cameras back on. Brilliant, thank you. Because we have got quite a lot of questions that have come through. So if you're happy, I think we'll just kick off straight away. Hannah, I've got a couple of just quick ones about governors. So first of all, can you recommend any training for governors? Is there specific training for wellbeing governors? And also, can a member of staff, can the staff governor also be the wellbeing governor? Would you advise that?
Okay, so on the training front, obviously there's resources on your own website that they can access, but also on our website too. We have just released our second part of an e-learning training around the Wellbeing Governor role, and that's the second part of a 3-part. The third part will be released at the end of this term. So that's a concrete training session, I suppose, with a certificate at the end, but there's also lots of resources and blogs on our website all about the role, and lots of resources to take away, and then links to other organisations that have, we've worked with and have also done resources specifically for governors. And the other question was, I've forgotten.
Right, staff. Can the staff governor be the wellbeing governor, in your opinion?
It's a tricky one. My gut feeling is preferably not. I just think you're potentially too close, and actually, how can you check up on your own mental health and well-being? It's just better to have a fresh pair of eyes, I think. And I think hearing it from another member of the governing board helps. I mean, you want to get as many people around the table talking about it, and not just be the head teacher and the staff governor. I think it is preferable, definitely, to have another governor in that role, is what I would say.
Thanks, Hannah, that's helpful. And yeah, just a quick plug for the Anna Freud Centre. We do have governor training for if people are interested, please do go to our website. A question for all three of you, I think, about how do we evidence the work that we're doing around mental health in schools? How do we measure it? How do we evidence the impact? Andy, I think I might start with you first of all. How can schools demonstrate the work they're doing?
Okay, thank you, Jamie. We've talked about, I talked a little bit in my presentation about different tools that people could use to kind of measure the well-being of young people in schools. It's a fairly crude way of proving impact, but actually, if you are able to take a survey of all students at a point in time, if you then put in support, so for example, through the curriculum, universal support for all young people, is there an impact of that? Well, actually, you could use that same tool at a second point in time and measure the difference. I think there are also kind of proxy indicators. So, for example, I would say exclusions. If your school has a high level of exclusions, and you then implement a program to support the well-being of young people, has that had an impact on the number of exclusions? Has it reduced the number of exclusions? Has it improved attendance? Those proxy indicators often give a good health check for schools on things that are going well.
Thanks, Andy. Stephen, anything to add in terms of how the family school is impacting and evidencing impact?
I think for us, reintegration rates, so we have an ambition to get children as quickly as possible back to mainstream or to other appropriate settings. So for us, that's a main indicator. But we also have, it is interesting whether we go for what could be considered traditionally clinical measures like RCADs, or schools usually have their own behaviour point systems, which work very effectively. And if we're schools and we're school-based, those are indicators within the school culture that the children understand that can be the point of conversation with teachers. And to some extent, I think they are fit for purpose in the main. So I think there is two different languages here. And I think one of the challenges that we're all faced with is how do we join up those two? The clinical world and the educational world are getting there, but they're not there yet.
Thank you. And just to pick up on that, there's been a few questions about RCADs. Andy, you mentioned it in your talk. Are there any alternatives to RCADs? Could you recommend any others? Someone had asked whether it could be used with primary. What would be your recommendation?
So RCADs, I think, are appropriate for children of aged 8 and above. So for upper primary in particular, that they might well be appropriate, and they might support that transition to secondary. I think particularly now at the moment with the young people coming back into school, the opportunities for transition from year 6 to year 7 are probably reduced. So actually, any additional evidence that schools can pass on to their secondary schools would be brilliant. I think what ARCADS does is it in particular helps identify things like anxiety, depression, separation anxiety. So that's really powerful, I think, at the moment with young people returning to schools after COVID. In terms of younger students, there are other options out there, and I think in particular the short Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale is particularly well used across schools, and can work well with younger students.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay.
Stephen, I've got a sort of collection of questions for you about the family school. Firstly, a quick one. A few people missed the name of the parent qualification. Can you just remind us again what it is, how people can access it, and if parents want to do that, how can they get a hold of that qualification?
Yeah, sure, Jamie. And I can see some of the questions in the chat. So if you want me to go very quickly through some of them, I'm happy to do that. I've just been looking on my phone for my emails to find the exact name of it. So if I get this wrong, then we'll get the name out to you. But it's a qualification for parents in child's wellbeing and mental health. And it's an OCN, Open College Network Level 2 qualification in that. The actual title that I quoted has got about 75% of being right with all those words, but it's some combination of mental wellbeing for parents. And we've started using it with our TAs because there's a grounding for understanding that and creating a common language between school staff and parents. We find it really useful. I can pick up on some of the other ones.
Yeah, I love a couple of questions. So first of all, we know that the family school is in London. How can people access it? There was a colleague from Sheffield who's saying, how can I get links into the family school? How can I get involved? How can I learn what the family school are doing? And also, how can children and young people be referred into the family school? And how are you helping to grow? Because we know the more people hear about you, how sustainable is to keep the family school model going?
So I think most of that is through the training offer, and there's training available at the moment for schools to pick up on to understand aspects of our practice. There are some local authorities that are consulting with us at the moment about how to have exactly the same provision, a family school, within their local authority. The government, the last wave of free schools has cut down on the number of AP schools that the local authorities are looking at. So that avenue may not be open. So the other way then is to look at changing provision as it stands. So the short answer is training, developing systemic understanding for teachers and the capacity to run multifamily groups. The other question was around how do we grow? There's a question about that I've seen. Can I pick up the one about big schools, Jamie? Is that okay? Yes. Because there is a practical element. We're very practical people within the school, and we're not. We recognise that actually getting parents in for most mainstream schools is a challenge. So most of the work we do is around that. So for the question around 1,000 pupil school, well, multifamily groups may be applicable for say 10 families, and there may be a threshold which may be 5 fixed term exclusions over a certain period, or a certain level of vulnerability, or a certain attendance, which triggers an invite for parents to come to a multifamily group, which may occur for an hour and a half, a week, or every 2 weeks. And there's a comment about it meaning a changing culture. I think there is a changing culture needed anyway. And so recently we've been doing quite a lot of work at schools looking at their homeschool agreements at year 7 and at year 1 to talk about what parent engagement might look like for your child and for you in the event of X, Y, and Z down the line. So it might be difficult to change culture immediately, but if you build some work we've done with academies that are now all through schools that were new schools, the parents already know there's an expectation possibly around a multifamily group or being part. If we think as a school body that's required at some point in the future. So yes, a changing culture. No, not every student. There's no capacity to have this for every student. But for some students, if it's the right thing, there's ways to trigger that, we think.
Thank you, Stephen. And just before I let you off the hook, I have one more question, which is about the pandemic, which I think is actually relevant to all of us, but we'll start with Stephen. How did you maintain that parent-carer engagement during the pandemic? How did the family school keep up that high level of working with parents under the very difficult lockdown situation that we've just been through?
It's strangely, I think in some ways it's benefited a lot. It's benefited the parent engagement in a lot of schools because we all had to amp that element up in our work. We had to start engaging more because there's much more communication between home and school about what the provision was going to be.
We've been surprised by how many parents have attended virtual multifamily groups. So that's 10 or 12 parents in some cases on a Zoom meeting with somebody facilitating, and they've got a lot from that as a support group. And we've got a lot from it because we can make sure those parents are still supporting their children in the home and helping with their learning. So, sorry, quick answer. We have done virtual groups. We were surprised that they worked as well as they did. And I think we'd say that our parents still feel connected. What we've also had is parents from groups being in contact with each other. So those support groups that we facilitate, things spin off that for parents supporting each other from that. I don't know if I answered that well, but got somewhere near.
It's helpful, thank you, Stephen. And Hannah, I guess I'd like to bring you in as well. Just in terms of the role of the governors, what impact does the pandemic have? Is there any learning, do you think?
I think so. I mean, we've obviously been meeting remotely during the pandemic, so I think there has been that aspect which may well continue going forward is how much governors will continue to meet remotely. I think it has impacted on the ability to see what's actually going on in schools, but then I think that's just part of the course, really. I think, as I said, it has strengthened relationships potentially between head teachers and the governing board. I think they've been in much more regular conversation. I think because it's all been done remotely, governors have been much more available potentially for meetings. So really been there to call on, and I'd hope that had been the case and that expertise had been called on where needed. So I think definitely there's been it's been a different in different schools, but definitely in schools where it's working well, we've seen increased communication. Just as with parents, there's been increased communication, there's actually been increased communication between the governing board and the staff, I would say. And lots of thanks is what else I've seen, definitely, to staff is definitely lots of stories about governors, emailing and sending in stuff to say thanks ever so much and show the appreciation for staff. I think that's been really evident.
Good, thanks, Hannah. And Andy, just to come to you, any thoughts on engagement during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognise, and school colleagues, I'm sure, will certainly recognise this, that schools have never been closed. Schools have been open to vulnerable learner children and key worker children throughout the pandemic. I think we've had some amazing successes with some of the vulnerable learners who've been in schools. They've been there in small groups, been able to get more attention. So actually, for some young people, it's been a real positive. What has been slightly more difficult then is when the rest of the school populations come back, and they've had to readapt again to being back into a larger environment. I think our biggest worry is around the kind of the invisible children, those children that maybe haven't displayed any problems, any difficulties prior to the pandemic. But there are various anxieties that are out there that are really affecting them now. For example, I'm seeing a rise in the number of eating disorders that we've had post children returning back to schools, which was surprising. I wasn't really expecting eating disorders to be one of the big rises, but clearly those are indicators of other underlying needs for young people.
Thank you, Andy. Andy, I have another question for you about RCADs. I'm sorry, just to check. Andy, the question is are your schools doing RCADs online? And if they are, how are they doing it? And does someone have to enter all the data? So a really practical question, but an important one. Yes, yeah. There is a spreadsheet version of RCADs that you can access for your young people to use that does all of the scoring for you. So you could print off paper copies and analyze it, but that takes forever. But the spreadsheet version, if you just do a search through your web browser, then I'm sure you'll find the spreadsheet version, which is really useful. Thanks, Andy. And Stephen, again, a kind of practical question for you. How can people access all of your resources? Where can they find the parental engagement scale and all of the things you've just talked about?
We've got a website that's launching next week in the meantime, which will be linked from the Anna Freud Centre. So I need to be clear with that answer. The answer is there'll be a link from the Anna Freud Centre, and Jamie, there'll be a way of letting delegates know as soon as that's available. We can get that
sent out. Is that possible?
Absolutely, we can actually attach things and send links in the follow-up email that we send. So yeah, we can do all of that. And we can link through to the 5-step site as well, Stephen, so that they can access it that way as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Hannah, a question to you. What happens if schools don't have mental health leads? What would you advise as a governor if your school hasn't got anyone leading on mental health?
Within the staff?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think then unfortunately it's all going to end up with the head teacher's door. That is the way it would work. And I think through having those conversations, I think the recognition that there is a need for that would develop. I think if you're funneling all of your questions to the head teacher and the SENCO, you're going to be adding to their workload, which is not ideal. So hopefully through those conversations, as a Wellbeing Governor, you will basically come to the conclusion that maybe there is a need for that role. Definitely, I think it's useful to have a different perspective as well for the governing board, so that it isn't just that you're just speaking to the head teacher. Obviously, you'll have a staff governor. Another reason why not to have the wellbeing governor as the staff governor, because hopefully you'll be able to get that perspective. I do think that doing surveys, and I saw there was some questions around frequency of surveys as well. You can obviously take information from the results of those, so you will get the perspective of the staff. But it is, I think, useful to have a go-to person who you can then dig into the answers of those surveys in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Hannah. So I'm conscious of time, and I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Stephen, to Andy and Hannah, because it's extremely helpful, and lots of really practical resources that hopefully people can use and can access as a result of attending the webinar. So thank you so much to all of our speakers, really helpful. So I just want to thank everyone today for attending the seminar. At the Anna Freud Centre, we're aiming to support all schools and colleges to become mentally healthy. And so we're really hoping to share our learning with you, but also to learn from you. So please do take some time now to fill out the evaluation and give us any feedback that you have. And please do get in touch also if you wanted to share any practice examples or anything to do with the work that you're doing. As I said, this has been recorded and we will send it out along with slides, and we'll send as many links as we can to all of the great things that Stephen and Hannah and Andy have talked about, and link through to websites so that all of the information that we've discussed today you can find. You'll also be able to find much of it through our 5 steps framework. I also want to take a moment just to talk about a future Schools in Mind event that's coming up, which is happening on the 15th of June, which you can sign up to. We're running a specialist event with colleagues at the UK Trauma Council, working with them to think particularly around bereavement, trauma and traumatic bereavement, and thinking about it from a school perspective. Colleagues at the UK Trauma Council have been working on a suite of materials for schools to use to work with children around the very complex and difficult issues of traumatic bereavement. So on the 15th of June, you can join us for one of these free online seminars where you can hear from UK experts on trauma and on bereavement, and to think about how we can support traumatic bereavement in schools. And we've just put a link in the chat to that if you wanted to sign up for it. So thank you so much for joining today. I really hope that some of what we've discussed is going to be helpful for you in your role. Andy talked about taking home one good idea. I think I've definitely got more than one. There were lots of great ideas of practical things that we can do there to support schools and to work more effectively together. So I hope that you'll be able to join us again. I really look forward to hearing some of your practice feedback, and until the next time, thank you very much for joining. Take good care of yourselves, and see you soon. Goodbye.